Joining the group chat today, Phil Mattingly, CNN anchor and chief domestic correspondent, Gabby Birnbaum, Washington correspondent for the Nevada Independent, and Kevin Frey, Washington correspondent for Spectrum News, New York One. Everybody, I want to just start with what the president is trying to do, because in that old clip we played, he talked about taxing endowments, which is not what he's doing, right? He's specifically saying, here's a list of demands, comply, or I'm going after your federal funding. So sort of who in the administration is pushing this? What can you tell us about the thinking?
Yeah, I mean, why slog through a legislative process that you don't know how it's going to end when you can just do it yourself? And I think this is so people cannot view what's happening here in isolation, right? We've been talking about this for the last several months, where the agility and kind of relentless nature with which the Trump administration and top senior advisors who have been planning for this for several years have really, to your point, initially bent institutions that never saw this coming, even though Trump talked about it on the campaign trail, to their will, has been something that people are just starting to kind of get their head around. And Harvard being the first school to say no is a fascinating moment to see whether this is the start of a tipping point.
And if there's any school that can do it, it's Harvard. It has a massive endowment. But meanwhile, Columbia faced a similar predicament, quickly caved. Kevin, talk about the dynamics there that are different.
Right. I mean, look, they were the center point of the anti-Semitism accusations early on. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik and other top lawmakers in Washington have been very loudly condemning what happened there, because they really became the face of the protest movement.
And that made them vulnerable to public backlash and vulnerable to political backlash.
Correct. And you also saw those dramatic images that played out when you saw the police go onto campus and they took over the building. And I mean, this kind of built and built and built. And so they were already under the microscope in that respect. And then they come in and they basically comply with a lot of what the administration is looking for, including sort of this mask ban and other sort of curriculum oversight, including on their Middle East studies program. And then on top of that, there's now conversations about whether or not there should be some sort of judicial oversight of whether or not they are in compliance.
Right. I don't want to just skip by some of the things you said. Oversight into actual curriculum. So we want to tell you, or at least be able to look at what you're teaching, which is ironic since they're kind of dismantling the ed department. But they want to do this in higher ed. Democrats and their allies coming to universities' defense. Here's a sense of what they've been saying.
Is putting pressure on universities as well. Good news is Harvard University today said, go to hell.
That may break the fever. I really hope it does. I do know this. If Harvard had capitulated, I really fear for what next year would be.
There are things that matter more than simply the size of one's endowment. We need presidents to be banding together and standing up for free expression.
Gabby, I probably could have stopped with Clyburn because he really lays out the stakes. But what are you hearing in congressional delegations? What are you hearing in your reporting about people seeing this as like a pivotal moment?
I think Democrats in general have been waiting for somebody, some institution, some group to stand up and say, you know, we're not going to abide by this. And I think Harvard, right, the big dog of academia doing it, I think we'll see, but I would imagine gives permission for some smaller universities, those with endowments that aren't as large, that don't have that, multiple hundreds of years history to say we can outlast any one political moment or administration, to sort of band with them. And I think we'll see some former Biden legal officials have talked about law firms need to do the same, that if they stand together, it'll be easier to stand against some of this rhetoric and action coming from the Trump administration. And so I'll see what moves forward.
We're going to talk about this more today. Group chat is back. I want to start with you, Phil, because I know you've done some investigating into this kind of policy. What's the thinking here?
Yeah, about a month ago, myself, my colleague Priscilla Alvarez, did a deep dive story into how President Bukele first brought this idea to Marco Rubio.
Rubio brought it to the Secretary of State.
Yes, when Rubio visited El Salvador on his first foreign trip swing through Central America. And who brought it to Nayib Bukele but Eric Prince, the former head of Blackwater, who is in contact with him and has a good relationship with him. And that matters a lot here, because that was the genesis of the U.S. sending undocumented immigrants down to El Salvador, as we've seen, and as obviously there's a current major political issue that the administration is dealing with here. But it's also the genesis of the idea of sending American criminals down to El Salvador, which, when it was offered to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, State Department didn't really say a whole lot. I think they understood the legal. It was rather tenuous.
Guantanamo situation, or like what's the offer here?
This is why you should pay attention to what's being said right now. And actually, there were a couple of comments that Trump made related to this yesterday that hinted at some things that are going on behind the scenes. And what they are trying to figure out right now with private contractors, and Prince and his operation have a proposal that's in play as well, is basically giving the U.S. some type of military base / diplomatic operation that would be U.S. territory within El Salvador. In exchange, the U.S. would help finance multiple prisons, like the Sikot prison that is where kind of the infamous one that everybody talks about. And that would be a plausible way to make this happen. Why? Don't have a great answer for you on that.
But to your point, this hot mic moment between the president, President Trump, and the president of El Salvador gives us a sense of just how into it this idea he is.
Homegrown criminals next. Yeah. I said homegrowns are next. The homegrowns built. You got to build about 5 more places.
Okay, I want to process what we're hearing here because Phil has given us a lot of information. You got to build about 5 more places. It's just this, we're gearing up for something, right? This is not just a winding down of a smaller story about one deportee. What are you guys hearing in your reporting or where you're from?
I think this is why, if you're a U.S. citizen, it's so important to pay attention to what's happening to visa holders, to TPS recipients, people who don't, permanent residents, whatever. If they can, sort of disappear someone under that legal framework, and we're seeing right now with the Supreme Court, as we talked about, whether that can occur. Obviously the idea that he could deport U.S. citizens is pretty legally implausible, like Phil said. But it's all about sort of making strides here, right? If they can do it to one population, they can sort of escalate that and escalate that. And so I think, can he do it, right, was sort of the thesis of Trump 1.0. I think Trump 2.0 is less can he do it. It's he's going to try to do things. Are the courts and are these co-equal branches of government powerful enough to stand in his way?
And it's not clear exactly. I mean, we're reaching one of those moments right now is kind of we're butting right up against the courts to see exactly what they will do. You have Democrats basically saying the courts need to hold the line, potentially hold the Trump administration in contempt, and we'll see exactly where that lands. The other thing I find kind of interesting about all of this is we've now seen the precedent from the Oval Office meeting just yesterday that we're kind of setting up this space where if they go through with this sort of plan, you can have, well, it's not my jurisdiction. Well, it's not my jurisdiction. And then you're left in this black site space, essentially.
And also, what's the definition of facilitate?
Correct,
I
exactly.
definitely want to know the definition of homegrown. Like, I don't want that to be a broad definition.
Correct. And so when you have this kind of, you're setting up this scenario where maybe to run the hypothetical a little too far, but you kind of have to, where you have a U.S. citizen sent to some foreign prison and there's no real ramifications for how to get them back, should the legal process play out, or what the legal process even looks like.
Phil, I want to come to you before we move on, because I feel like this is one of those moments where in the media we'll be accused of like spinning this up or overhyping or raising alarms. But I mean, what you're telling me out of your reporting is that we're on a path to someplace and we're not there yet.
Yeah, so figuring out, one, the build process, the actual getting U.S. territory and what it would actually look like process.
But you've laid out some of it. Military contractors, a foreign country that's willing.
There's a draft proposal that the administration has their hands on. There are other contractors that are also trying to get into the space. They believe that this is a viable option right now. They believe this is something, clearly, El Salvador's president put it on the table initially, and clearly the Trump administration, despite some initial reticence, is now, look, this is one of the situations where if people accuse you of getting spun up or making too big of a deal about something, you point them back to what the president was saying. The president was talking about this explicitly in the Oval Office with President Bukele. This was not something that they were hiding the ball on. It is very clear that this is something that they're talking about. How they do it, the timeline for what that would be, and also the process that they would actually pursue. Nobody really knows right now, but the only thing that I think everybody needs to keep in mind, and we've talked about this before, failure of imagination is not something that people, I think, should be able to claim at this point in time. And it is clear when you watch in the Oval Office that this is something that kind of animates them and that they think is a plausible idea. And based on everything we've seen over the last 3 months, why wouldn't they?
Yeah. All right, stay with us. We've got a lot more to discuss here. There's always one part of the group chat that you have to be like, mute. Anyway, we're going to talk about what we're keeping an eye on today. We're going to start with Kevin.
Thank you. So AOC and Bernie have been hitting the trail out west. They did this last month. They're doing it again now. They've been hitting
massive rallies. You're
massive
hitting
rallies.
the trail.
Yes,
this is thousands of people.
Tens of thousands of people at these various events. Not all of them in very blue areas. And so they wrapped up Idaho and Salt Lake City over the last 2 days. They're supposed to go to Montana tomorrow. They're wrapping up some California ones today. So just keeping an eye on that and what it says about the Democratic angst and desire for some sort of message at this moment.
Okay, Gabby Birnbaum. I mean, you know Nevada, but what's your look ahead?
So I'm looking at, I think, Kevin, you are too, in Nevada, New York, and some other states, there are these Republicans whose districts have reaped massive benefits from the Inflation Reduction Act, the climate law that Democrats passed in 2022. This is a key area that Republicans are looking to cut spending. They're looking to revoke some of these tax credits towards companies in the renewable energy space, and it puts a lot of Republicans in an awkward position.
Right, because there were Republicans who really moved forward in the renewable energy
and you don't have to be, super into climate change to feel that there's a business case to be made, that this is jobs, this is energy savings, what have you. And so they're sort of working behind the scenes, and we're going to see if they're able to influence the bill.
Last seconds to fill.
Trump administration officials have been very dismissive about China's ability to fight a trade war publicly. Something changed yesterday. Kevin Hassett, the National Economic Council director, said the rare earth export controls were very concerning that had been put on. China basically controls the entire market, absolutely integral. They're concerned, and that's interesting to me.
All right. Thanks to our group chat. Thank you for waking up
Kevin.
with us. I'm Bonnie Cornish, CNN News, the real news. CNN News Central starts right now.